Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I got another comparison video for you guys, and this is kind of the comparison video between the who's on the top of the totem pole per se. And I'm sure you guys have seen a billion of these knives. We have right here on the bottom we have the Grimsmo Norseman, and we also have at the top here the Holt Specter. This is a V3 Specter. So today I just kind of wanted to go through, now that I have both of these knives in my personal collection, kind of what things about one that I might like more than something about the other, or vice versa, my recommendations as to which one I think you should get, and we'll talk about price differences, weight differences, and other specifications. So start off with, I think specs are a good place. For the Norseman, we have a blade length of 3.7, Specter's 3.6, so very negligible difference there. We can just talk about the blades. We'll just move part by part. So if you've watched my Norseman review, the solo video, you know that I talked a lot about the blade and the controversy behind it, and not only do people think that the blade is a dumb shape, but they purposely leave the milling lines in here from the CNC machine that they use, and a lot of people don't like that. I personally do. I think it's cool. I think it's unique. I don't think it adds or detracts from the value of the knife, so it's purely an aesthetic thing. As for the blade shape, it's certainly unique. I've heard that there are, like specific benefits to having a blade of this shape, but I can't really think of any practical ones besides strength. Given kind of the belly it has here and the different grind, this tip is going to be stronger than that of the Specter per se with the normal drop point. So if I went to pry something with this blade, this is weaker than the Norseman blade, strictly from the shape itself. For the Norseman, you have jimping on the spine of the blade. Specter, you have jimping, very kind of minimal jimping on the Specter, whereas the Norseman is pretty noticeable. The thing about this is that I think, I could be totally wrong, but I think this is called a crowned spine. I'm not 100% sure, and that in my head right now I'm saying that because I think that's what it means, just when the spine of the blade has been rounded off. So there's no real edge here. It's almost a perfect semicircle on the top of the blade. So it's an interesting shape, and the rounding on top is pretty unique as well, whereas the tip has remained a flat. So blade shape is really going to be the only difference here. With the Specter, you're going to see a million of my fingerprints on here. I tried to wipe it off, but it's going to be in vain because I'm going to keep touching the blade. Specter, like I said, you have drop point, a nice near mirror finish on it. They'll do all the Norseman blades really in kind of a satin stone wash. With the Specter, it has a full flat grind, whereas the Norseman has just a flat grind that stops, about 3/4 of the way up the blade stock when you get to this kind of flat bevel here. As for thinness behind the edge, if we look at the kind of the base of the blade as well as the grind, they're pretty similar. Just from this alone, I would have to say it looks like I don't know, these are probably pretty similar behind the edge. I wish I had calipers to show you guys like the pros do, but I do not, so I can't tell you. But as for blade shape, practicality-wise, I think the drop point is going to be the way to go. There's a reason like 90% of knives have drop point blades. With this guy, I think obviously up here you have fine slicing. You can use this to do any really like minimal slicing or whatnot. Whereas the recurve part of this blade, this would pretty much be referred to as recurve tanto or modified recurve tanto. The recurve part is where you kind of get into trouble versus when it comes to functionality, because you can't slice with this knife. When I have this knife in my hand and I try and put it flat against a cutting surface, all that is touching is the edge of the tanto right here. None of this is going to touch the blade. Even if I put the knife totally flat on the table, there's still, I mean, I can put my finger under here. That's where you're going to get kind of people shying away from this blade shape, because you can't use it for slicing, and that's kind of what knives do. But you know, most people that are going to have a Norseman, honestly, they're not going to be cutting food with it. But even if they are, you know, you just be dangerous and hold it with your hand and whatnot. Since we've gone off the shape, I guess we can talk about the flipper nature of these knives. Flipper tabs are, you know, super popular in the knife world. Both of these have flipper tabs. The Norseman also has a thumb stud, which it is not dual. I think at this point dual thumb stud is more of an aesthetic thing, and that's why they decided to just keep it a single thumb stud. But the thumb stud is totally usable. It works well. But obviously the flipper tab is the primary mode of deployment for these knives. Flipper action is great. The Norseman blade is very heavy, so it really makes for a good, snappy, powerful deployment, as well as adding to the drop shut nature of this knife. And that's kind of what the Norseman is known for. And as you saw just then, the blade will bounce. You can hear the double click. And sometimes it will bounce out of the detent. So you can see that this blade is totally free right now, even though I totally just closed it. So that, honestly, that kind of gets on my nerves sometimes, but you really just have to make sure you hear the double click and make sure that it snaps into place and the detent engages. So as for the Specter, no thumb stud, just flipper. And I think for the Specter's overall sleek design, I think that's a good choice. If it had a thumb stud, it would look out of place, whereas the Norseman, the whole design is just kind of unique, so they could really do anything to it, and it would be like, okay, like, fine with me. So the Specter is just a very sleek knife. It's very slim, so the flipper deployment is great on these knives, as I'm sure if you've heard of Specters before, you know that's what they're known for, is their action. And I have not had any problems with the action on this guy. What I did have problems with was the pivot coming loose and not staying tight. And so what I would have to do is kind of find the small, there's a really fine line of tightening the pivot to the point where you get the nice drop shut action, but there's no blade play. And so the problem I was having is I would tighten it and I would get a fantastic drop shut action like what you're seeing here, but there would be blade play. And if I look at the blade right now, there's no blade play, only because I used Loctite, and I finally got that going. But it was really annoying just in the first day or so that I had this guy, and I was taking him apart, putting him together, and trying to figure out what I was doing wrong and why it was either too tight and wouldn't drop shut every time, or there'd be too much blade play, or the blade would be off center. And so that was kind of irking me. But after I put some Loctite on here and it really set after a day or so, I have not had any issues with this guy, and it's been just a dream. So a big thing for me right now that I recently just kind of realized is that if we hold these two side by side, you can see that the Specter has a flipper tab groove, which is, what I mean by that is that when the flipper is ready for deployment, you can see there's a groove right here that is chamfered or milled into the spine of the handles, whereas on the Norseman, there's none. And so what this does is it basically just kind of makes a nice little area for your finger to kind of come off the flipper handle, and it's almost like a ramp for your finger just to kind of ease off the spine of the handles, because the spine of the handles on the inside are fairly sharp, not like, ridiculously sharp, and they've obviously have a nice chamfer on here, but if there was no flipper tab and I was just deploying this all day, it kind of tear my finger up a little bit. And so what I noticed with the Norseman after sitting here at night, just hanging out, flipping it a bunch, is that it kind of hurts your finger after a little bit, because these edges on the inside of the scale really aren't chamfered. And it's the same all the way around. There's not really any chamfering on the inside of the scale, and you can really feel it here on the end by the lanyard hole. And so what happens is, when you sit here and you deploy this knife, and I had some problems with the detent being a little too strong in the early days of owning this, even though it was brand new, was that I would sit here and I'd flick it, and my finger would just kind of keep coming off these sharp edges on the inside, and that was just a little discomfort. So I really wish that the Norseman had a flipper tab groove. I think that would be a tremendous improvement, and I messaged John on Instagram and I said, I don't know if anyone's ever said this or not. I assume people have told you this or not, but I think the design would be benefited by a flipper tab groove. And I sent him a video of, if I put these all kind of lined up and I bring out the F95 seared Warog, as well as the Koenig areas, you can see that they all, let me get it to focus here, they all have flipper tab grooves. The Ariuses are huge, but that's just more of a design thing. But they all have flipper tab grooves. You'd think that kind of would have been picked up on, but apparently not. And it's really not a big deal, and it's totally a nitpick thing. Totally a nitpick. Like I totally enjoyed this knife without having the flipper tab groove, but it's just a design thing that I think would really benefit the knife overall. And so I messaged John, he responded, and he said he hadn't really heard any of that before, and they really have no intentions of looking at adding a flipper tab groove, but he said if he ever got bored one day and he wanted to check something out, he might do that. So I think that we can finish up the blade segment of this comparison with just talking about the blade steel, and it's going to be a short conversation because on the Specter we have, if we can get the camera to focus, we have CPM 20CV, which is a new development, I think in just the V3s or maybe just the Prestiges. I think it was the V3. I think in the V3 they switched to CPM 20CV from M390. I couldn't tell you anything about CPM 20CV other than that it is one of kind of the higher tier steels, in the sense that it really kind of covers all the bases on blade toughness or blade attributes. It has good corrosion resistance, kind of understandable difficulty in sharpening, good edge retention, and just overall toughness. The Norseman here is made of RWL 34, which I have never heard of being used as a blade steel outside the Grimsmo shop, and I couldn't tell you anything about it. So if you are a steel nerd and you know stuff about that, then I'm sure that will help you inform your decision on, if you want to pick these knives, which one you should pick. So if we move away from the blade and onto the handles, I'm just going to start with design, which is a little bit difficult just because both these knives have a number of handle options. The Norseman has significantly less than the Specter. To start, the Specter has the satin feather in the nude, feather, which is this exact same design except for this kind of the middle, I don't know what to call this, just the raised part of the scale is a kind of a satin finish. And the little striations on the sides are still there, and they have polka dot and checkered and moire and starburst and all these other really cool handle milling options, and that's something that you can do when you have a CNC made knife. And what CNC, what I say when I refer to CNC, if you're not familiar, is CNCs are big machines they use to make these knives, and they just kind of put in a program, tell the machine how to mill the handles and the tool paths and whatnot, and the handles are made, and essentially what the maker is doing is physically they're assembling the knife, and they'll probably and finishing the knife when referring to the blade. So traditionally, custom knife makers, like the OG custom knife makers like Thorburn and those other guys, they make all their stuff by hand, and they cut out the handle pieces, and they engrave them by hand, or they design them by hand, put it all together, blah, blah, blah. Everything's handmade. And so with the new dawn of CNC machines, not that new, but with the dawn of CNC machines, it basically kind of made that stuff easier, and that meant that knife makers didn't have to do everything by hand anymore. And, they could just have a blank handle scale, and they would just design whatever they wanted the machine to cut out, and then that would be it, and they'd have to wait 20-30 minutes for it to be done, and then they just assemble it. And so some people kind of bring that up when price gets brought up. And so if you have an expensive knife like this, and it makes it hard to classify, because is it a custom knife, is it a mid-tech, is it a semi-custom knife? And it's hard to decide. Jim Skelton just made a video on the Specter, I think a couple days ago, and he talked a lot about that. And he mentioned, he went more in depth, and he kind of really tried to hash out what category these guys fall into, because yes, there is handwork involved, like the Holts. Joe grinds the blades, and he finishes them, and they put the mirror polish on it, and they anodize the handles and whatnot. But the CNC really kind of does the work in cutting up the handles and rough shapes. Well, they send their blades to a water jet company to cut the shape out. But anyway, and the Grimsmo, same thing. They CNC their scales and the blades, and like I said, that's where this kind of stair-step striation pattern comes in on the blade. They do this on the CNC, and they just cut a raised tool path, kind of a stair-step tool path for the bit to kind of go along and create this texture and visual effect. And when people bring up price and whether it's a mid-tech or custom or not, that comes into play, because if the knife's not being made totally by hand, then it's not a custom knife. So there's a lot of debate on that, and honestly it's personal opinion, and it all comes down to price justification. This thing could be whatever kind of knife you want. It could be production, semi-custom, mid-tech, whatever. That doesn't matter until you talk about price, because once you start paying the same price for a CNC knife as you would for a handmade knife, that's when people start to get shifty. So that is a whole debate going on right now, and it's really comes down to personal preference. But if you're like me, you could not give a shit, honestly. Like, I understand that the level of effort that goes into these knives is significant, no matter who's making what or what's making what. And I understand that the price is going to be dependent on some of that work and labor and materials, but it's worth it. The Specter is an expensive knife, and the Norseman is as well. So honestly, you get what you pay for, and I don't really care what work is involved. The finished product is what's important to me. So as we got lost in that tangent there, just talking about the handle milling, like I said, Specter's got a bunch of options, Norseman's got a bunch of options, and then of course there's anodizations involved. One thing that kind of really makes this difficult to do is the Specters, the Holts do maker's choice 90% of the time, which just means they make random configurations of knives and sell them as such. That's what Norseman is. They're all maker's choice. You buy what is offered to you. That's what it is. But the other 10% of the time for the Specters, the Holts do custom orders. It seems as though they're still working through custom orders from a year or so ago. But And then that's where you can pick what handle materials, and they offer fancier stuff now. They have bolster locks, which I handled at Blade Show. You can do inlays, and there's a million different combinations and materials you can use. Like you could do Zerk, you could do full Zerk, polished, whatnot, Damascus, Mokume. There's one carbon fiber inlay out there. But yeah, it just makes it a little bit harder to compare these two because there is a really kind of customized aspect to these. So I think that would actually be really cool. Now, this is the first time I'm realizing this, but if you're familiar with Benchmade kind of does their little like customized shop thing where you just build the knife. If you're talking about a Griptilian, you pick the color and the scale material and the hardware colors and whatnot. And I think that would be really cool if the Norseman did that, because it's so if you watch their YouTube channel, everything is it's a very like manufacturing. I don't want to say that because I kind of feel like that would diminish the value of the knife, but it truly is like they push out a ton of parts. Like they push out a ton of the honeycomb scales and the reverse honeycomb and whatnot, and I think they could really make some money if they made kind of a custom shop or like a little customizer thing. And I know that is literally just making a custom knife, but I mean keeping it strictly isolated to just picking the handle material. The handle options and the colors. I think if they just picked that and like people could decide that I want the reverse honeycomb with purple anodized hardware and a blue scales with like purple undertones, that'd be really cool. And I think people would really dig that, because some people don't like the specific variations of the knives. So yeah, I think that does it for handle milling, and I'm trying to keep on task here. It's not working at all. So if we continue our comparison video, I think next we can move on to weight. And I'll tell you right now, the Norseman is a big knife. So if we pop the Norseman on here, we'll see that it comes at 5 ounces even. And the Specter, 3.6, so about an ounce and a half difference, which is pretty sizable. I mean, visually you can tell that the Specter is both slim in the width of the knife as well as the thickness, although they are pretty similar in thickness, and honestly the Norseman might be a little bit thinner. The blade, like I said, the blade on the Norseman is much larger. There's a lot more material going on here, and the stock is thicker. Since the edge is crowned, it's a little hard to tell, but if you look at the base of the jimping right here where my thumbs are, you can see that it's pretty there's a bigger difference there. Now if we want to talk price, kind of the big showstopper for some people, the Specter, there's realistically two grades of Specter. There's the refined and prestige, and the refined, there's different fancy milling options and pivot options and color and whatnot, blade finishes. The refined Specters start at $700, and bottom of the barrel $700. That's going to get you a plain, totally nude, like just plain handle, no anodization and whatnot Specter, $700. As you kind of go up in options and whatnot, refined you can push up to like 800 or something. Then you get into prestige grade, which is what this is, and prestige basically means more options with the finishing, especially premium materials. This year we have Damascus for the pocket clip and the backspacer, so that adds, I think these add like $100 a piece or something like that. So the price of this Specter right here was $1,070. So $1,070 right here versus $700. We can kind of bounce between the two, but with this you're including premium materials with the Damascus. With the Norseman, Base price is I think it's $890. I think $890 or $900 is the new base price point for these guys. So Specter is $700 base. This is basically $900. This particular one was $940. So it's tough. It's really tough. I would honestly say that the Specter has more value. I really would. I think the Norseman is beautiful, and I think the options are really cool. But the only thing that adds value to the options of the Norseman is like kind of this dual anodization we have going on here. You can't tell because my finger oils have muddied it up, but if you look kind of on the lock side, you can see that little patch of purple right there. That's what the actual color is. So it's this really beautiful purple with the ice blue accents underneath, and that double anodization adds value. So this is actually $940 versus the $890. But if we were looking at just a plain Specter at $700, I would definitely say it's worth, like, it has more value than the base price of the Norseman, especially when I can get a Timascus backspacer and pocket clip and pretty much be darn close to the same price with less than like $100 difference. So I think the Specter has more value. Unfortunately, with the current market right now, Specter secondary price for a refined that is like would be like $750 from the makers is going to cost you like between $1,000 and I'd say $1,200 is what I've seen them go for. I think the bubble is close to popping though, and they're coming down in value a little bit just because whenever they do pop up on the secondary market, they immediately get bought. But a lot of people come in the comments and say this is absurd pricing. So the amount of people who are willing to pay that super premium price for these knives is slowly decreasing. So there's a lot of secondary value or secondary market value that comes into play with the Specters, whereas the Norseman, if you see one of these pop up on the secondary market, it's 90% of the time going to be retail. Just because, I mean, the owner might have had it a couple days and flipped it and whatnot, and so that normally would decrease the value. But they really hold their value well. But there's not a significant price boost when it comes to these coming up on the secondary market. So. I think we've talked about a lot of it so far. One really minor thing is the Norseman has a lanyard hole and the Specter does not. So I think I was watching, I think it was Jim Skelton's video where he mentioned that if the Holts did something like Shirgorov and made the backspacer have the lanyard hole in it and have it recessed into the handle, that would be very kind of slim and classy and fit the design, and I agree. I personally just like the full backspacer more though. So another thing that is worth mentioning is that the Specter also has an adjustable detent, and so I have no idea if we're going to be able to get this. If you see, looking just to the left of the insert screw, you can see that little black circle down there in the gap of the lock bar. That is another screw. And they give you a tiny little hex driver, and you can adjust the detent and make it harder or softer. And what I did when I got it is I made it a little bit harder. So it's really hard. I don't even know if I can misfire this. I will try. Yeah, you can just barely, but honestly, I don't even know how I did that. Yeah, I don't know how I just did that. But anyway, the adjustable detent is really cool. I don't know if they have a patent on it yet. I think it's patent pending, but that's something that could really change up the knife game. Like there are a handful of knives out there that kind of they're make or break because people don't like the detent. And, having the option to really customize the detent on your knife would be really cool. And I think it's really cool, and I enjoyed it on the Specter. The detent on mine was just a smidge lighter than I would have liked, and so that's why I tightened it up, and a little goes a long way. So that's just a small difference that stands out and honestly adds even more value to the pricing, really. In my Norseman video, I do talk about the packaging and how that, in my eyes, is a little bit of a value adder. And what I mean by that is, with the Specter, you get a taco pouch and the detent tool and some stickers, and that's it for $1,100. And like I get it, and like part of me doesn't care, because who gives a shit about the box? Like, you're not going to use the box like you use the knife. But that's just a bit of a presentation thing, and I think they could do a little bit better. And I know that they used to ship out these huge boxes. Like, honestly, they were enormous. They were like this big, like too big, and they got a lot of feedback that said it was too big and it took up too much space and whatnot. So they changed that. I would still like to see a box at some point versus the taco pouch, but it's sticks and stones. The Norseman Packaging, they give you a tiny little like Pelican case, and it comes with a torque driver, which, if you haven't noticed, all of the torque heads on your screws are the same size, even the pivot. So you just need that one little torque driver, and you can totally disassemble the knife. And they also include nano oil in every single knife, like the normal nano oil size applicator, and that's really cool, and that really adds value to this. And so, if we were breaking it down between the refined, $700 Specter and this $900 Norseman, I think the value gap would be significantly closed just by the Norseman Packaging. Like, truly, it's just the little things. It just makes a difference to me, and I'm sure it makes a noticeable difference to other people as well. But yeah, I think that's about it. If you ask me which one I like more, I'd say the Specter, but that's I would say primarily out of an aesthetic thing. Honestly, the Timascus and the adds a little bit to that. But I love this the feather and the nude. I think that's an awesome milling option, and it feels really cool. So I really love the handle milling. I love the design. It's super sleek. The tolerances are great. Like I said, I had some issues with it in the beginning, and another one of those issues was the blade being off center. But that's pretty much been fixed now just by itself. So I'm pretty pleased. With the Norseman, I love the options they have, and I like the overall design. The blade doesn't bother me at all. I think the anodization on this guy is beautiful. Unfortunately, my finger oils have muddied it up, but they're both fantastic knives. And like I said at the beginning of the video, they're on the top of the totem pole in the kind of the mid-tech semi-custom world, and that's for a reason. They're both fantastic knives, and they have their own faults. For me, faults with the Specter would be the free spinning pivot, which really only comes into play if you're trying to take it apart. I don't like the free spinning pivot. Other than that, that's about it. With the Norseman, faults in my eyes are the lack of a flipper tab groove, and that's it. Like, both these knives are phenomenal, and there's a reason everyone wants one, and that they have made, some, I think they're on like Norseman like 2600, something like that. This is 2097. So they're pumping out thousands, literally thousands of these, and people buy them all. They just buy them up. It's insane. They always sell out, and the Specters are even harder to get. Now there's I think just north of 500 of these now. This is $4.99. There's just north of 500 of them, and they're impossible to get. Truly, I'd probably say they're. It's difficult to say whether this or a chamois is harder to get, but they might be equal at this point. These have way more market value on the secondary. Like, I know chamois go for a lot more than the retail, but these, it's nuts. Like I said, people will charge what I paid for this knife just for their their shitty refined Specter. It's not shitty, but just because it has no handle milling and no anodized hardware and not even let alone the Timascus and the blade finish. And they're people are paying like $1,300, so it's nuts. But anyway, sorry. Great knives, fantastic. I think they're both worth the money. I really do. I don't think I can see myself letting these guys go. And the only reason I would, if I had to I think I would be more likely to let the Norseman go, and that's only because there's like 3,000 of them, and I could easily find another one. That's the only reason I would do it. It's just because the availability. So, yeah. There you have it. I'm enjoying doing these comparison videos. I know they're pretty all over the place, and I've gone off on some rambles, but I think that I don't think any of that was unwarranted. So I think going scriptless is not a terrible thing at this point. But if you guys have any comments or any thoughts, feel free to throw them at me in the comment section. And yeah, thanks for watching. This has been a comparison video between the Grimsmo Norseman and the Holt Specter.